Drinking alcohol, smoking, and drug use are harmful to health.
The fog clung to the cliffs like a shroud, muffling the crash of waves far below. Nora Kane's boots crunched on the gravel path as she approached the lighthouse, its skeletal silhouette barely visible through the mist. The air smelled of salt and decay, and the wind carried a faint, rhythmic hum that wasn't quite natural. She pulled her coat tighter, her breath catching as the beam of the lighthouse swept across the horizon, illuminating nothing but endless gray. Nora hadn't wanted to come to Blackwater Cove. The small coastal town, perched on the edge of nowhere, wasn't exactly a tourist destination. But the letter she'd found in her mother's attic, tucked inside a locked box she hadn't known existed, had been insistent. Come to Blackwater. Find the truth. E. No signature, no explanation, just an address scrawled in her mother's handwriting and a key taped to the paper. Her mother had been dead for 3 years, and Nora still didn't know why she'd kept this secret. The lighthouse loomed closer now, its weathered stone walls streaked with salt and moss. The door was ajar, creaking on rusted hinges. Nora hesitated, her fingers brushing the key in her pocket. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest like a warning. She should have stayed in her car, should have called someone, anyone. But the letter had felt like a summons, and Nora was tired of unanswered questions. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, smelling of mildew and something metallic. A spiral staircase twisted upward, disappearing into shadow. Her flashlight beam danced across the walls, catching on faded photographs pinned haphazardly, faces she didn't recognize, their eyes scratched out with a blade. Her pulse quickened. She called out, "Hello?" Her voice echoed, unanswered. The hum was stronger here, pulsing like a heartbeat. It came from above. Nora climbed the stairs, each step groaning under her weight. At the top, the lantern room was empty save for a single chair facing the glass, which overlooked the churning sea. On the chair sat a journal, its leather cover cracked and stained. The key in her pocket matched the lock on its clasp. She opened it, her hands trembling. The pages were filled with her mother's handwriting, frantic, looping scrawls detailing the signal and the tide's whisper. Dates spanned decades, ending 3 years ago, the day her mother died. One entry stood out. They're watching. They always know when you're close. The light doesn't guide, it hunts. A loud thud echoed from below. Nora froze, the journal slipping from her hands. The hum stopped, leaving only the sound of her own breathing and the distant crash of waves. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, climbing the stairs. Nora's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall, clutching the journal to her chest. The footsteps were heavy, uneven, like someone dragging something behind them. She scanned the lantern room for a weapon, a hiding place, anything. But there was only the chair and the glass walls, reflecting her pale, wide-eyed face. The beam of the lighthouse swept past, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cracking. No answer, just the relentless creak of the stairs. She fumbled for her phone, but the screen showed no signal. Of course not. This was Blackwater Cove, where even the air felt cut off from the world. The footsteps stopped just below the landing. Nora held her breath, willing herself to stay calm. Maybe it was a caretaker, a local checking the lighthouse, but the scratched-out faces in the photographs flashed in her mind, and her gut screamed that whoever was down there wasn't here to help. A low, guttural sound broke the silence, not quite a voice, more like a growl. It sent a shiver down her spine. She edged toward the staircase, peering down into the spiral of darkness. The flashlight beam caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow, too tall, too thin, slipping out of sight. Her stomach lurched. She backed away, her mind racing. The journal, the key, her mother's warning. This wasn't random. She'd been led here. The growl came again, closer. Nora's eyes darted to the glass walls. The drop to the cliffs below was deadly, but there was a narrow ledge outside, barely wide enough to stand on. It was her only chance. She shoved the journal into her coat, pushed open the heavy glass door, and stepped onto the ledge. The wind howled, tugging at her clothes, and the fog swallowed her view of the ground. She pressed her back against the cold stone, inching along the ledge, her fingers gripping the rough surface. Below, the sea roared, and the hum started again, louder now, resonating in her bones. It wasn't coming from the lighthouse anymore. It was coming from the water. She risked a glance down, and her breath caught. The waves weren't just waves. They pulsed, unnaturally rhythmic, forming shapes that looked almost human, rising and collapsing in the foam. A loud crash from inside the lantern room jolted her. Glass shattered, and something heavy scraped across the floor. Nora moved faster, her boots slipping on the wet stone. The ledge ended at a rusted ladder leading to the roof. She climbed, her hands shaking, and hauled herself onto the flat, weathered surface. The lighthouse beam swung overhead, blinding her for a moment, and when her vision cleared, she saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the roof, facing the sea. It was human, or close to it, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her, just stood there, swaying slightly, as if listening to the hum from the water. Nora's mouth went dry. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. Then it spoke, its voice like gravel dragged across glass. "You brought the key." Nora's hand tightened around the journal. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice barely audible over the wind. It turned, slowly, and she stifled a gasp. Its face was a mockery of human features. Eyes too large, mouth stretched wide, skin glistening like it had been pulled from the sea. "You're hers," it said. "You shouldn't have come." Before she could respond, the thing lunged. Nora stumbled back, narrowly avoiding its grasp, and scrambled toward the ladder. She half climbed, half fell down to the ledge, her hands scraping against the rusted metal. The thing didn't follow, but its voice carried on the wind, low and mocking. "The tide knows." She reached the ground, her legs trembling, and ran toward her car, parked at the edge of the cliff path. The fog was thicker now, the hum deafening, vibrating through the ground. She fumbled with her keys, her eyes darting to the lighthouse. The beam swung again, and for a split second, it illuminated the figure standing at the cliff's edge, watching her. Nora sped away, the lighthouse shrinking in her rearview mirror. She didn't stop until she reached the only inn in Blackwater Cove, a squat, weathered building called The Anchor. The parking lot was empty, the neon sign flickering. Inside, the lobby smelled of stale coffee and damp wood. An older woman sat behind the counter, her eyes sharp despite the late hour. "Room for one?" the woman asked, her voice clipped. Nora nodded, still shaken. "Yeah, just for tonight." The woman, her name tag read Clara, slid a key across the counter. "You been to the lighthouse?" she asked, her tone too casual. Nora froze, her hand hovering over the key. "How'd you know?" Clara's eyes flicked to the journal peeking out of Nora's coat. "Folks who go up there always have that look, like you've seen something you shouldn't." Nora's throat tightened. What's up there? What's with the water? Clara's face hardened. Get some rest. Don't go back. She turned away, busying herself with papers, but Nora caught the tremble in her hands. In her room, Nora locked the door and spread the journal on the bed. The entries grew more erratic as she read. Her mother had been part of something, a group, a cult, a research team. It wasn't clear. Studying the signal in Blackwater Cove. They'd found something in the water, something that wasn't just alive, but aware. It sees you when you see it, one entry read. The light calls it. The tide answers. Nora's head spun. Her mother had been a marine biologist, rational to a fault, not someone who chased conspiracies. But the scratched out faces, the thing on the roof, the hum, it was real. She flipped to the last page, where a single line was written in red ink. If you find this, Nora, run. She slammed the journal shut, her pulse racing. Her mother had known she'd come here, had wanted her to, maybe, but also feared it. Nora paced the room, the hum still echoing in her mind, faint but persistent. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without answers. The next morning, the fog hadn't lifted, but the town felt different. The streets were too quiet, the few locals she passed avoiding her eyes. She stopped at a diner, hoping for coffee and clarity. The waitress, a young woman with nervous hands, poured her a cup without a word. Nora noticed a tattoo on her wrist, a spiral, like the waves she'd seen last night. Nice tattoo, Nora said, testing the waters. The waitress flinched, covering her wrist. Thanks, she muttered, hurrying away. Nora opened the journal again, skimming for anything she'd missed. A name appeared in several entries. Dr. Elias Marrow. The letter had been signed E. Could he still be in town? She asked the waitress when she returned, keeping her tone casual. Know anyone named Elias Marrow? The waitress's face paled. No, she said too quickly. Nobody by that name here. She retreated to the kitchen, leaving Nora's question hanging. Nora paid and left, her instincts screaming. She drove to the town's library, a crumbling building that smelled of old paper and salt. The librarian, an older man with a weathered face, barely looked up as she approached. Looking for something specific? Records, Nora said. Anything on a Dr. Elias Marrow. The librarian's eyes narrowed, but he pointed her to a microfilm reader in the back. Old newspapers are there. Good luck. Hours later, Nora's eyes burned from scanning grainy articles. She found mentions of Marrow, a scientist who'd lived in Blackwater Cove 30 years ago, studying tidal patterns and marine life. He'd vanished after a storm, wrecked his research boat, presumed dead. But one article, dated a year later, mentioned a sighting of a man matching his description near the lighthouse, muttering about the tide. The accompanying photo showed a gaunt man with wild eyes, standing by the cliffs. Nora's breath caught. She'd seen those eyes last night. She left the library, her mind racing. Marrow wasn't dead. He was the thing on the roof, or connected to it, and her mother had known him. Nora drove back to the lighthouse, the journal and key heavy in her coat. The fog was thinner now, but the hum was back, louder, pulling her like a current. The lighthouse door was locked this time, but the key fit perfectly. Inside, the photographs were gone, the walls bare. She climbed to the lantern room, her heart pounding. The chair was still there, but now a small metal box sat on it, engraved with the same spiral she'd seen on the waitress's wrist. She opened the box with the key. Inside was a single object, a glass vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid that seemed to move on its own, swirling against the glass. The hum spiked, deafening, and the lighthouse beam flickered, casting strange shadows that danced like figures in the fog. A voice came from behind her. "You shouldn't have opened it." Nora spun, dropping the vial. It didn't break, rolling across the floor toward Clara, the innkeeper, who stood in the doorway. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, like the thing on the roof. "You're hers," Clara said, echoing the creature's words. "But you're too late." Nora backed away, her hands fumbling for the journal. "What is this? What was my mother part of?" Clara's smile was cold. "She tried to stop it, tried to warn you. But the tide always takes what it's owed." The hum became a roar, and the floor shook. Nora glanced at the vial, its contents pulsing faster. The shadows on the walls grew sharper, forming shapes, hands, faces, reaching out. Clara stepped forward, her movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. "Give me the journal," she said, "or you'll see what's coming." Nora bolted, clutching the journal, and ran down the stairs. Clara's footsteps followed, unnaturally fast. Outside, the fog was gone, and the sea was alive, waves rising in spirals, figures forming and dissolving in the foam. Nora reached her car, but the engine wouldn't start. Clara emerged from the lighthouse, her face twisting into something less human with each step. Nora abandoned the car and ran along the cliff path, the journal tucked under her arm. The hum was everywhere, in her head, her bones, urging her toward the water. She stumbled, falling to her knees, and the journal slipped from her grasp, pages fluttering open. The wind tore at them, revealing a hidden map tucked inside, a path leading to a cave at the base of the cliffs. She had no choice. Nora scrambled down the rocky incline, the vial's hum guiding her like a beacon. The cave's mouth was narrow, hidden by seaweed and shadow. Inside, the air was thick, the walls slick with salt. The hum was deafening now, coming from deep within. She followed it, her flashlight flickering, until she reached a chamber where the walls glowed faintly, covered in spirals, carved into the stone. In the center stood a figure, Elias Marrow, or what was left of him. His body was wrong, elongated, his skin shimmering like the creature on the roof. He held another vial, identical to the one in the lantern room. "You brought it," he said, his voice a distorted echo. "You've completed her work." Nora's voice trembled. "My mother, what did you do to her?" "She saw the truth," Marrow said. "The tide isn't just water. It's alive. It's always been alive. And it's hungry." He stepped closer, and Nora saw the vial in his hand, pulse in sync with the one she'd left behind. The cave shook, water seeping through the walls, pooling at her feet. The spirals on the walls glowed brighter, and the hum became words, fragmented and ancient, whispering of sacrifice, of balance, of a debt owed to the sea. Nora backed away, her mind racing. Her mother had tried to stop this, had left the journal to warn her. But the key, the map, it was a trap, luring her here. Marrow reached for her, his fingers cold and slick, but she ducked, grabbing a loose rock from the cave floor. She swung, striking his arm, and the vial fell, shattering. The liquid inside hissed, evaporating into a dark mist that filled the chamber. Marrow screamed, his body convulsing, and the hum faltered. The cave shook violently, rocks falling from the ceiling. Nora ran, her lungs burning, as the sea roared behind her, flooding the cave. She climbed the cliff path, the water chasing her, and didn't stop until she reached the town. Blackwater Cove was empty. The diner, the inn, the library, all abandoned, as if the town had never been alive. Her car was gone, but the journal lay on the ground, its pages soaked but intact. She picked it up, her hands shaking, and drove the only other vehicle she could find, a rusted truck outside the diner. As she sped away, the lighthouse beam flickered one last time, and the hum faded. But in the rearview mirror, she saw the waves rise, forming a face, her mother's, eyes wide and pleading, before it dissolved into the tide. Nora didn't stop driving until dawn. The journal sat on the passenger seat, its final page open to a single word written in her mother's hand: run.